Gold digger marries my dad 2 years before his death, and now she expects to take over his estate, but she has no clue who really owns it. All right, so here's the deal. My dad's going into hospice next week, and it's been a mess for a while now. I mean, we all knew it was coming, but it doesn't make it any easier, right? Thing is, the house he's living in with his wife Sandy and her two daughters, Tina and Beth, isn't even his house. It's mine. I bought it years ago, but you wouldn't know that by the way they've been acting. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me rewind a bit. About 7 years ago, things got rough for my dad after my mom passed away. They'd been together for over 30 years, and when she died, it wrecked him. I mean, it was hard for all of us. But my dad? He fell apart. He lost his job a few months later, couldn't keep up with the rent on their apartment, and got evicted. It was like everything just crumbled at once, and he didn't have anyone else to turn to. I was all he had. So being the only kid in a position to help, I bought him a house. Nothing crazy, just a small place in a quiet older neighborhood. It wasn't fancy, but it was safe, and more importantly, it gave him a roof over his head when he really needed it. He had his dog Charlie too, and honestly, Charlie was like his last connection to my mom. That dog was family to us, you know? It made the whole situation a little easier for him. For the first few years, things were good. Dad was healing, slowly, and the house became his little sanctuary. He got back on his feet as much as anyone could after something like that, and Charlie was always there by his side, keeping him company. I'd visit every weekend, and it became our routine. Charlie would wag his tail like crazy whenever I showed up, and we'd hang out in the backyard, grilling burgers, catching up, just trying to enjoy life again after everything that had happened. Then Sandy came into the picture. They met through some mutual friends, and before I knew it, they were married. I wasn't against it or anything. I mean, I was happy for my dad if this was what he needed. And Sandy seemed all right at first, you know? She was polite, always had a smile, and she seemed like she genuinely cared about my dad. So when he said she was moving in, I didn't have a problem with it. It's his life after all, even if it's technically my house. As long as he was happy, that's all that mattered. But here's where things started getting a little weird. First, it was just Sandy moving in. Fine. Then, out of nowhere, her daughter Tina shows up with all her stuff. Like she's moving in too. Now, Tina's in her late 20s, a grown adult. So it's not like she's some kid who needs a place to crash for a weekend. No, she's there to stay. I didn't say anything because, again, it's my dad's life and I wanted to respect that. But still, it was a little strange, right? A few months go by and I start noticing things every time I visit. There's more of Sandy's stuff everywhere. The house, which used to feel like my dad's place, now felt like it was more hers. Whatever, I told myself. Dad's happy, let it be. But then, just when I thought it couldn't get more crowded, Beth, the younger daughter, moves in. Now it's a full house. Sandy, Tina, Beth, and my dad, all under one roof. And you can imagine how that went. At first, I tried to let it go. I mean, yeah, it was weird seeing my dad's home being slowly taken over by Sandy and her daughters, but what could I do? I'm not going to tell my dad how to live his life. But things started getting worse. The vibe in the house shifted. Suddenly, my dad's opinion didn't seem to matter much anymore. Everything was about what Sandy and her daughters wanted. Things were already going downhill with Sandy and her daughters slowly taking over my dad's house. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get more annoying, we had the whole mess with Charlie. Let me explain something about Charlie. This dog wasn't just a pet. Charlie was family. My mom loved that dog like he was her baby, and after she passed away, Charlie became my dad's emotional support. It was like Charlie was the one thing keeping him grounded after everything that happened. I know some people don't get that, but if you've ever had a dog, you know what I mean. So, you can imagine how much it pissed me off when Beth, Sandy's youngest daughter, started complaining about Charlie. Like, really? Charlie was old, harmless, and spent 90% of his day either sleeping or chasing his own tail when he wasn't too tired. But one day, out of the blue, Beth comes up with this whole thing about how Charlie makes her uncomfortable. She said she didn't feel safe with him around. Now, I'm not one to dismiss people's fears, but come on. This was Charlie, not some rabid wolf. The guy was 12 years old, could barely make it up the stairs without needing a break, and was about as dangerous as a pillow. I didn't take it seriously at first. Thought maybe she was just being dramatic. But Sandy, of course, jumped in to back her up, making a whole big deal out of it. She started saying that maybe it was time for Charlie to find a new home, like he was some unwanted furniture that needed to be thrown out. That was my breaking point. I could see the stress it was putting on my dad. He wasn't just being asked to give up a dog. He was being asked to give up the last real connection he had to my mom. It broke my heart to see it. But what could I do? I wasn't living there, and Sandy had pretty much taken over the decision-making in the house. I could tell my dad didn't want to get rid of Charlie, but he was tired. He was dealing with his own health issues, and I guess he didn't have the energy to fight back anymore. So, yeah, I stepped in. I told my dad straight up that Charlie could come live with me. I wasn't going to let Sandy or her daughters bully him into giving up that dog. My dad was relieved, but I could tell it still hurt him. I mean, he didn't want to give up Charlie, but he knew it was the only way to stop the constant arguing in the house. Sandy acted like she was doing him some huge favor by letting me take Charlie in, but I knew better. It wasn't about Charlie. It was about control. She and her daughters wanted to be the ones calling all the shots, and Charlie was just another way to push my dad out of the decision-making process in his own home. From that day on, I started bringing Charlie with me every time I visited, and every single time, it was like I was bringing some kind of dangerous animal into the house. Tina and Beth would literally act like Charlie was going to maul them any second. The first time I showed up with him after taking him home, Beth actually screamed when she saw him, like she hadn't lived with this dog for the past few years. Sandy tried to play it off, but you could see her rolling her eyes every time I walked in the door with Charlie trotting behind me. It was ridiculous. Charlie would come in, wagging his little tail, barely noticing them, and all they could do was complain about how scary he was. I'd sit with my dad in the backyard, just like we always did, while Charlie lay there in the grass, not bothering anyone. And yet, every time Beth or Tina would peek out the window, give us this disgusted look, and run off like they were avoiding some kind of attack dog. Honestly, I think they just hated that Charlie was still around because it was a reminder that this was my dad's house, not theirs. Charlie was part of my dad's life, part of my mom's life. And no matter how much they tried to take over, Charlie was a constant reminder that they hadn't completely pushed my dad out yet. But then, one day, Sandy finally said what I knew had been coming. She asked me not to bring Charlie around anymore. I was fuming. Why? I asked. Charlie's not doing anything. He just sits there. She tried to sugarcoat it, saying how Beth still felt uncomfortable and how it was just better if Charlie didn't come over anymore. I could see right through it. This wasn't about Charlie at all. This was about power. She and her daughters had been slowly chipping away at everything that was important to my dad, and now they wanted to get rid of the last thing that connected him to his old life. I was livid, but I didn't want to make things harder for my dad. He was already sick, and the last thing I wanted was to stress him out more. So, I told Sandy straight to her face, Charlie stays. He's not hurting anyone, and if you don't like it, then don't come outside when I visit. She didn't like that, not one bit. But I wasn't backing down. I could tell she wanted to push harder, but I wasn't giving her the chance. From then on, every time I visited, Charlie came with me, and I didn't care what they thought. My dad deserved that much, at least. The tension in the house got worse after that. It was like Sandy and her daughters were just waiting for my dad to be out of the picture so they could fully take over. I could see it in the way they treated him, like he was just some old man taking up space. But as long as Charlie and I were around, they couldn't quite get rid of him entirely. And now, with my dad going into hospice, I can already see the writing on the wall. They think they're going to get the house, that everything's going to belong to them once he's gone. But they're in for a surprise. This is still my house, and Charlie, he's going to outlast all of them. So with my dad going into hospice soon, I knew time was running out to say goodbye properly. It was something I dreaded, but I couldn't put it off anymore. He wasn't doing well, and I needed to see him, especially since I'd been taking care of Charlie ever since Sandy and her daughters basically forced him out. I wanted to bring Charlie to see my dad one last time, let them have their moment before everything went downhill. When I showed up at the house, Sandy, Tina, and Beth were already there. The second I walked in with Charlie by my side, I could feel the tension in the room. You know when you walk into a place and everyone just stops what they're doing? Yeah, it was like that. The vibe was off, but I didn't care. I was there for my dad, not for them. Tina was the first to say something. She looked at Charlie, wrinkled her nose, and said, "Oh great, he brought that stupid dog again." She wasn't even trying to hide the attitude. She acted like Charlie was some kind of wild animal, but the truth is, Charlie was so old at this point, he barely moved unless you coaxed him with a treat or something. But there she was, acting all dramatic, like the dog was going to destroy the house. I took a deep breath and ignored her. I wasn't about to start a fight right then, even though I could feel my blood boiling. I just said, "I'm here to see Dad," and headed straight for his room. I could hear Sandy say something to Beth under her breath as I passed, but I didn't catch all of it. Probably some passive-aggressive comment about me or the dog, but whatever. I didn't have the energy to deal with them. When I got to my dad's room, he was lying in bed, looking frail but still awake. His face lit up when he saw me, and when Charlie trotted in behind me, wagging his tail like crazy, my dad smiled for the first time in weeks. It hit me right then how much my dad had missed Charlie. Charlie immediately jumped up on the bed, which honestly was a struggle for him with how old he was, but he made it. He curled up next to my dad, like they hadn't missed a beat. My dad reached over and scratched behind Charlie's ears, just like he used to. For a few minutes, it was like things were normal again, and I could see how much peace it brought my dad to have Charlie there. We didn't talk much at first. It was one of those moments where words aren't really needed, you know? I just sat there with him, Charlie laying between us, and we stayed like that for a bit. I could tell my dad was weaker than the last time I'd seen him, and it hurt to see him like that, but there was also a kind of relief. At least for those few minutes, he looked happy again. After a while, my dad spoke up. "I've missed this old guy," he said, his voice a little shaky but still carrying that familiar warmth. "It's good to see him again." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak without choking up. I didn't want to show how emotional I was getting, so I just reached over and patted Charlie on the head. We talked for a bit, about simple things. Memories, stories about Charlie, old family moments from when Mom was still around. It felt good, but it was also bittersweet. The whole time I kept thinking about how this might be the last time I'd ever see my dad like this, awake and aware. It's a hard thing to wrap your head around, even when you know it's coming. And then, of course, Sandy had to ruin it. I was getting ready to leave when she walked in, not even bothering to knock. She glanced at Charlie curled up on the bed next to my dad and immediately looked annoyed. "I thought I asked you not to bring that dog here," she said, crossing her arms and glaring at me like I'd committed some huge crime. I felt the anger bubbling up again, but I stayed calm. "Charlie isn't hurting anyone," I said, keeping my voice steady. "He's here to say goodbye to Dad. You've got a problem with that?" Beth, who had followed her mom into the room, piped up from behind her. "Good riddance," she muttered, loud enough for me to hear. "I'm glad we won't have to deal with him after this." That was it. I'd had enough. I stood up trying to keep my cool, but it wasn't easy. "You know what? I don't care what you think about Charlie. He's family, and he's staying here as long as I'm here. If you don't like it, tough." Sandy looked like she wanted to argue, but my dad cut her off. "It's fine," he said quietly. "Let them be." His voice was soft but firm, and Sandy didn't push it any further. I stayed a little while longer after that, mostly to make sure my dad and Charlie had enough time together. But eventually I had to leave. I knew it was probably the last time I'd bring Charlie over, and I wanted it to end on a good note. As I was walking out, Tina was sitting in the living room, scrolling through her phone, and she barely looked up when I passed. But just as I was about to reach the door, she said, "I can't wait until we never have to see that dog again." I stopped in my tracks, turned around, and just stared at her for a second, trying to decide if I was really going to engage. But then I just said, "You won't have to," and walked out. I didn't need to give them any more of my time. On the drive home, I kept thinking about how wrong this all felt. It wasn't just about Charlie. It was about everything. How my dad's house had become something else entirely. How Sandy and her daughters had taken over. How they didn't even seem to care about my dad's condition. It was like they were just waiting for him to die so they could get on with their lives. But the joke's on them. This house isn't theirs, and when the time comes, they're going to find that out the hard way. Update 1. After that last visit with my dad, I knew something had to change. I couldn't keep tiptoeing around Sandy and her daughters, letting them act like they owned the place while I just stood by. My dad wasn't getting any better, and it was only a matter of time before he was gone. Once that happened, I knew Sandy and her daughters would expect to stay in the house indefinitely, just living there rent-free like they'd been doing for years. I wasn't going to let that happen. But instead of dropping the big bomb on them about the house being mine, I decided to take it step by step. First, I needed to see how they'd react to the idea of paying rent. Maybe, just maybe, they'd show some sign of responsibility and agree to it. But I wasn't holding my breath. So a few days after that emotional visit with my dad, I went back to the house. I walked in, and as usual, Sandy, Tina, and Beth were all hanging out in the living room like they didn't have a care in the world. They were watching some reality show on TV, laughing at something, and it honestly made me mad. My dad was in hospice, and here they were, acting like everything was fine. I took a deep breath and walked into the room. Tina glanced up at me, barely acknowledging that I was there, while Sandy paused the TV, clearly annoyed that I was interrupting their precious showtime. "Can we talk for a minute?" I asked, trying to keep my tone calm. I didn't want to start this off on the wrong foot, even though I was already feeling frustrated. Sandy raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "About what's going to happen after my dad passes," I said. I could feel the tension in the room rise instantly. The smiles and laughter disappeared, and suddenly, all eyes were on me. Good. They needed to hear this. I've been thinking about it, and we need to talk about the house, I continued. Specifically, about rent. The word rent hung in the air like a grenade waiting to explode. Beth let out an incredulous laugh. Rent? What are you talking about? I didn't let her get to me. Once Dad passes, things are going to change. If you want to keep living here, you're going to have to start paying rent. I've already talked to a lawyer, and we've worked out a fair amount based on the market value of the house. Beth looked at me like I just insulted her entire existence. Tina sat up straight, ready to jump in with some snarky comment, but Sandy beat her to it. Wait a minute, Sandy said, narrowing her eyes. Why would we need to pay rent? James wanted us to stay here. I nodded, keeping my voice even. I get that, but I've been covering the costs of this house for years, and that can't continue after he's gone. You've had a good deal here for a long time, but things are going to have to change. Either you start paying rent, or you'll need to find somewhere else to live. The room went dead quiet. I could see the wheels turning in Sandy's head as she tried to process what I was saying. Tina and Beth looked completely blindsided, like the idea of paying rent had never crossed their minds. Of course it hadn't. Why would it, when they'd been living there for free all this time? Finally, Sandy spoke up, her voice sharp. This is James's house. He wanted us to stay here. You're not going to charge us rent after everything we've done for him. I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my cool. Look, I'm not trying to make this difficult, but the reality is someone has to take care of the expenses, and it's not going to be me anymore. I've already covered everything up until now, but I can't keep doing that after Dad's gone. You either pay rent or you move out. Those are your options. Tina finally jumped in, her face red with anger. You're unbelievable! We've been living here for years and now you're trying to make money off us? What kind of person does that to family? I sighed, feeling the frustration building. I'm not trying to make money off anyone. I'm trying to make sure things are handled fairly. I've given you plenty of time, and I'm giving you more time now. 3 months after Dad passes, 3 months to figure out what you're going to do. That's more than fair. Beth crossed her arms, glaring at me. So what? You're just going to throw us out if we don't pay? I don't want it to come to that, I said, meeting her glare. But yeah, if you're not willing to pay rent, then you'll have to leave. I can't keep covering the costs for you. Sandy stood up then, trying to play the victim card. I can't believe you do this to us after everything we've done for James. Everything we've done for this family. You're just going to kick us out like we're nothing? I shook my head. I'm not kicking you out. I'm giving you options. But like I said, things are going to change, and you need to be ready for that. I'm giving you 3 months to figure it out. That's more than generous. I could see Tina getting ready to say something else, but I was done with the conversation. I'd said what I needed to say, and I wasn't going to stand there and argue with them all day. So before they could pile on more complaints or guilt trips, I turned and headed for the door. As I left the house, I could still hear them talking, probably trying to figure out how to get around this, how to keep living there for free. But I wasn't going to budge. I'd given them their choices, pay rent or move out, and in 3 months they were going to have to face reality. They just didn't know yet that the house wasn't even my dad's to give them. Update 2. It happened faster than I thought. One day my dad was still hanging on, and the next, he was gone. Even though I knew it was coming, it still hit me like a ton of bricks. Watching him slip away like that wasn't easy, but at least I knew he was at peace now. It was over for him, and the pain he had been living with for so long was finally gone. But after the funeral, I had to deal with the aftermath. And no surprise, Sandy and her daughters, Tina and Beth, were acting like nothing had changed. It was almost as if they'd been waiting for this moment, expecting everything to fall into place for them. Like they were ready to take over now that my dad wasn't around. But they had no idea what was coming. I gave it a few days after the funeral to let things settle down, but I wasn't going to wait too long. The sooner I dealt with this, the better. They were probably expecting to stay in that house forever, free of charge, but I had other plans. So, I went over to the house. When I got there, Sandy was in the living room with Tina and Beth, sitting around like they owned the place. They were laughing about something on the TV, totally ignoring the fact that my dad had just passed. There was no grief, no sadness, just them living their lives like nothing had happened. I stood in the doorway for a second, just watching them. It was surreal, honestly. How could they be so unaffected by everything? I mean, my dad had just died, and here they were, acting like it was just another day. Finally, I cleared my throat and walked in. Sandy turned to look at me, but didn't say anything. Neither did Tina or Beth. They just sat there, waiting. I guess they thought I was there to talk about funeral arrangements or whatever. I took a deep breath. We need to talk about the house. Sandy frowned, not understanding. What do you mean? We've already talked about this. We're staying here just like James wanted. And there it was. The entitlement I had been expecting. I could feel my anger rising, but I kept my cool. I wasn't going to let them get to me. No, I said, shaking my head. We haven't talked about this. You think you're staying here, but the truth is you're not. This house isn't my dad's. It's mine. I bought it for him after my mom died, and now that he's gone, it goes back to me. The room went dead silent. I could see the shock on Sandy's face, like she had no idea what I was talking about. She blinked a few times before finally saying, "What are you talking about? James never told me that. This is our home." I almost laughed. Yeah, well, he didn't need to tell you. This house was never his to give. I bought it for him to live in after he lost his apartment, but it's been in my name the whole time. And now that he's gone, it's time for you to go too. Tina stood up, looking furious. You can't just kick us out. We've been living here for years. This is our home now. I turned to her, keeping my voice steady. No, it's not your home. You've been living here for free, and I've let it slide because of my dad. But now that he's gone, that stops. You either start paying rent or you leave. You have 3 months to figure it out. They were all stunned. Sandy looked like she was about to cry, but she quickly turned that into anger. You can't do this to us. James wanted us to stay here. I'm sorry, I said, although I didn't really mean it. But that's not how this works. Legally, this is my house, and I'm not going to let you stay here without paying rent. You've been taking advantage of my dad for years, and I'm done letting it happen. Sandy tried to argue, but I wasn't listening anymore. I could feel the tension building in the room, but I wasn't backing down. This was my house, and I had every right to do what I was doing. I've already spoken to my lawyer, I added, pulling out the paperwork to prove it. If you don't believe me, here it is in black and white. I own this house, not you, and not my dad. I've given you 3 months to figure out what you're going to do. After that, if you're not out, I'll have no problem evicting you. Beth was sitting on the couch, staring at the paperwork with her mouth hanging open. This can't be happening, she muttered, looking at Sandy for some kind of reassurance. But Sandy had nothing. She knew it was over. I could see it in her eyes. She had been banking on this house, thinking they could just stay here forever, rent-free. But now, reality was hitting them hard. You've got to be kidding me, Tina said, pacing around the room. After everything we've done for James, you're just throwing us out? I almost laughed again. Everything you've done? You mean disrespecting him, pushing him to get rid of Charlie, and treating him like a guest in his own home? Yeah, real generous of you. They all started talking at once, trying to defend themselves. But I wasn't listening anymore. I'd had enough of their excuses, their entitlement, their complete lack of respect. My dad deserved better, and I wasn't going to let them keep living in this house like they owned it. I've said what I came to say, I told them, turning toward the door. You've got 3 months. After that, we'll see what happens. As I left, I could hear them still arguing behind me, trying to figure out what they were going to do. But that wasn't my problem anymore. They had spent years living off my dad, off of me, and now it was time for them to deal with the consequences. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders as I walked out of the house. It wasn't going to be easy, but I knew I was doing the right thing. I had let them take advantage of the situation for too long, and now it was time to take back what was mine. This house wasn't theirs. It never was. And soon enough, they were going to be out of my life for good. Update 3. So after I told Sandy and her daughters they had to move out or start paying rent, I figured that was the end of it. I mean, what else could they do? I had the law on my side, all the paperwork showing I owned the house, and I gave them more than enough time to figure things out. 3 months was fair, right? Well, apparently Sandy didn't think so. Because, get this, she tried to sue me. Yeah, Sandy actually went to a lawyer and filed a lawsuit, claiming she had a right to stay in the house because she was my dad's wife and had been promised it after he died. When I first heard about it, I almost laughed. I got served the paperwork one afternoon while I was at work, and my first reaction was, you've got to be kidding me. I mean, what was she thinking? She knew I owned the house. I'd shown her the documents, spoken to her calmly about it, and even gave her more time than most people would to get her life sorted out. But no, apparently that wasn't enough. She decided to take it to court, thinking she'd somehow win. Now, I've never been a fan of going to court. The whole process is just a headache. But at the same time, I wasn't worried. I had my lawyer lined up and ready to go, and I knew we had everything we needed to shut this thing down before it even got off the ground. The first thing I did was call my lawyer. He was calm about it, probably because this kind of thing happens more often than you'd think. He looked over the paperwork Sandy filed and was like, yeah, this isn't going to go anywhere. They don't have a leg to stand on. But even knowing that, I was still annoyed that I had to deal with this at all. I mean, come on. They had already been living in my house rent-free for years. What more did they want? Anyway, the whole thing dragged on for a couple of months. Sandy was making all these claims about how she was promised the house by my dad, even though there was zero paperwork or proof to back that up. She tried to play the grieving widow card, acting like I was this evil guy kicking her out of her home. But the reality was, she had no legal claim to the house at all. During the hearings, I had to sit there and listen to her lawyer try to spin this story about how Sandy and my dad had plans to leave the house to her after he passed and how she had put so much into making it a home for them. Yeah, sure. What she left out was how she and her daughters had taken over the place, treated my dad like a guest in his own house, and tried to get rid of Charlie, my dad's dog. But of course, none of that came up. I kept my cool through most of it. I knew the judge wasn't buying it, and my lawyer was doing a great job shutting down every claim Sandy's lawyer made. We had all the documents to prove that the house was mine, title deeds, bank records, everything. So every time they tried to bring up some promise my dad supposedly made, we hit them with cold, hard facts. One of the more ridiculous moments was when Sandy tried to claim she had made improvements to the house and that she deserved some kind of compensation for that. Improvements? The house was in the same condition it had been in when I bought it. If anything, it was in worse shape because they hadn't taken care of it properly. My lawyer pointed that out, and the judge shut that argument down real fast. And, to make it even better, Sandy's daughters, Tina and Beth, had the nerve to show up in court and act like they were victims in all of this. Tina tried to talk about how they had been living there for years and how it was their home, and I just sat there thinking, you've been living there for free, and now you're trying to act like I owe you something? I wanted to say something, but my lawyer gave me that look that said, let it go, so I stayed quiet. It didn't take long for the judge to make a decision. He basically said what we all knew from the start. Sandy had no claim to the house. There was no will, no written agreement, nothing that showed my dad had ever promised the house to her. And since the house was legally mine, Sandy and her daughters were going to have to move out. I wish I could say I was surprised, but honestly I wasn't. I knew this was how it would end. The whole lawsuit was just a desperate attempt to hold on to something they never had a right to in the first place. The judge gave them a final deadline, 2 weeks to move out, or the eviction process would start. When we walked out of the courtroom, Sandy wouldn't even look at me. She just stormed off with Tina and Beth trailing behind her, all of them acting like I had done something horrible to them. But I didn't feel bad. I'd given them more time and more chances than they deserved, and they still tried to screw me over. In the end, they didn't have much of a choice. After the court ruling, they packed up and left. I didn't hear from them again after that. No more phone calls, no more texts, nothing. It was like they disappeared, and honestly, I was relieved. The whole thing had been a nightmare, but now it was over. The house was finally mine again, and I didn't have to deal with their drama anymore. Sure, it had been a long, exhausting process, but I came out on top. And Sandy, well, she lost. It didn't matter what promises she thought my dad made. In the end, the law was the law, and she couldn't change that. So yeah, she tried to sue me, and she lost. Now the house is mine, and they're gone for good. And honestly, that's all I ever wanted.